Yep, that's fine by me.
Hey, John. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name's Sean, the editor of the Westminster Employment Forum, and it's a terrific pleasure to have you all online with us this morning. I'm just here to make a few brief business announcements before handing over to my colleague Connor, who will talk you further through the use of Microsoft Teams. First of all, there will be numerous opportunities throughout the morning for you to ask questions and comments, and please do feel free to submit questions to our speakers, and we would encourage you to have them lined up as we approach those questions and comment sessions. You can ask questions in two ways. You can ask questions in written format. You're welcome to do that using the Q&A box. That's a Q&A box rather than the chat function, which we like to reserve for informal networking. The Q&A box should be in the top bar of your screen. Also, you can ask questions to do this. If you raise your hand, colleagues will unmute you. In addition, just a reminder that you will receive a full recording from this morning's proceedings, and that will be sent to you in about a week's time, and will include all speaker PowerPoint slides with speaker permission. Finally, please do feel free to continue the conversation, and indeed, as we're using social media, and indeed as we're discussing going through the seminar this morning, you're welcome to use the WEMF events hashtag, which is on the bottom of the slide on your screen. So without further ado, I'll hand over to my colleague Connor, who will tell you a little bit more about Teams. Connor, the floor is yours.
Great morning, everyone. It's just a couple of tech tips from me. Captions are available if you click the three dots, the More function, go to Language and Speech, and select Turn on Live Captions, and they will appear on screen as our speakers are presenting. To view the list of participants, click on the People icon. Here you can scroll through every speaker and all attendees today. As Sean said, we like to use the chat function for general networking. You can find emails, links to articles, things like that are best found here. To open the chat box, click the chat icon on the toolbar. You'll be able to type your messages in there. We like to save the Q&A for the questions just to try and keep them all in one place. If you can't access it, please don't panic. Put your question in the chat and we'll put it in the Q&A on your behalf. To submit your question in the Q&A box, type in your question, press a send or press enter, and the question will appear there. If you would like to ask an audio question, feel free to raise your hand. It will bring you up to the top. You will then be able to turn your camera and mic on. Please do just say your name and organisation before you begin speaking, as it really helps with the transcript, which will be made available afterwards. If you have any audio issues you're really struggling to fix, the best bet is to dial in using your mobile phone. Select three dots, the Call Me function, type your mobile phone number in, and the audio will begin to play out of your phone. We are aware of a couple of issues with slides. If they do freeze, unfortunately, the best bet is just to drop off and join back in. Please do let us know, though, as we are then able to report it, and hopefully it will get fixed as soon as possible. To continue the conversation, please do discuss with the hashtag WEMF events. All the events are recorded and the recording will be sent around post-event along with PowerPoint presentation subject to permissions. If you have any issues at all, please don't hesitate to contact myself, Sean or Elsa, or call the tech support number provided. That's all from me. I'll hand over to our first chair, Jonathan Ledger. Thanks very much.
Connor, thank you so much indeed. A very good morning to everybody and huge thanks to you all for joining. We know we're going to have a really interesting discussion this morning with Westminster Employment Forum policy discussion around next steps for local improvement plans and regional skills plans in England. We have a really good selection of speakers, really high quality, and I'm really excited about welcoming these today. It is worth bearing in mind that for those of you that don't know me, I work in the Department for Business and Trade as the Skills and Professional Bodies Specialist, and I work both in the UK and overseas. And for me, LSIPs are really about the local and global impact that we want from our talent. And it has a big impact on inward investors, for example. We want to make sure we've got the right talent in the right places. And I guess what we're trying to achieve here is a synergistic approach, of aligning employer demands with, provision in the right place at the right time to create that skilled talent and that world-class talent that everyone is looking for. And there's lots of work that goes on in this space already, but these really just help to bring it together. But rather than me trying to explain it, I'd like to get on with experts and views from around the country, and we have lots of them today. So Connor mentioned about putting questions in the Q&A section. Please do, because we want to challenge our speakers and make sure that they are able to respond to some of your thoughts and questions. So first up, though, we have Parminder Kohli, who is the Commissioner for Social Mobility Commission. Parminder, very good morning to you. I hope you're connected. We can see your slides. There we are. Parminder, it's over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good morning, all, and really pleased to be here on the Westminster Employment Forum on talking about importance of developing skills and talent to address social mobility. As Jonathan mentioned, my name is Parminder Kohli. I'm a commissioner at the Social Mobility Commission. I also have a day job. I work for Shell. I run a business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, which spans about 100 countries and about 2,500 people. Now, I've been with Shell almost 22 years, and in that period, I've been a passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion and social mobility, both within Shell and outside. I also chair our diversity network here in the UK. We go to the next slide. Let's see if the technology works. Oh, here we go. Excellent. So let me just introduce my commissioners and talk a little bit about the commission. So the Social Mobility Commission exists to see a country and the UK where circumstances of one's birth do not determine the outcomes in life. Now, it is an independent statutory body which comprises appointed commissioners and a small secretariat. Now, the 6 fellow commissioners of mine were appointed alongside me in September of 2022. And then last year, Baroness Stowell joined us in June. We had our interim chair, Alan, who started way back in November 21, but then he got appointed as the chair of the commission only late last year in November. So that's our commissioner body. Actually, we're looking for 2 new commissioners. The Cabinet Office appointment closed yesterday, given the depth and experience on social mobility that exists in this virtual room. I hope some of you have applied to join us at the commission. So the primary purpose of the key objectives of the commission, there are three big objectives. One, we publish a State of the Nation report, which looks at the progress made in the country on social mobility and our views on it. The second big thing we do is we promote social mobility by challenging employers, professions, universities, and schools to do their bit in promoting social mobility. And finally, we do commission and publish research reports into social mobility practices. So that's a little bit the work of the commission and what we do. Now, I think we all want to see a country where where you're born doesn't determine where you end up in life, and opportunities are fairer across the society. But in order to explain how we might visualize it, if you look at the first visual, you can see the escalator representing how you progress in life. And while your effort matters and what the hard work you put in matters, but where you start in the queue can determine where you end up in life. And that's represented by the first visual. Now, by removing barriers and creating more opportunities, we can increase the absolute mobility. So clearly there are more opportunities for people to progress, but still it does matter where you are in the queue. And finally, I think that's the purpose of this conference this morning as well. What are the targeted interventions we can do? What kind of help can we provide for people who are really back in the queue to improve their chances? And that's what we call relative mobility. And that mobility can be determined in terms of employment opportunities, housing or income mobility. So mobility comes in many shapes and forms, but we do know that the deck is sort of stacked up against people from lower socioeconomic background. And too often, where you start in your life and people you're born the geography you're born in and your parents can determine to a large extent where you end up in life. And that's not the world we want to live in and accept. Now, I talked about the big objective or key purpose of the Social Mobility Commission is to produce an annual report, which is called the State of the Nation report. And last year, and every year, we expand and improve on the report. And last year, one of the big things we did was to take a much more granular look at all of the social mobility indicators, especially across geographies, but also across some protected characteristics like sex and ethnicity, and also disability. So let me just share with you some of the findings which are, I think, pertinent to conversation today and the topics you'd be discussing subsequently. So one thing, as I mentioned, was, too often opportunities in life are determined by just the simple geography in which you're born. And in our country, unfortunately, there's a lot of disparity, as is seen from these two charts. So let me just help unpack what these charts are representing. Now, it's a very composite index of multiple things, and keeping the socioeconomic background constant across these indicators. So if you look at index of precarious situations, these are basically the index of depravity in the parts of the country. And clearly you can see, parts which do well and parts which don't do well. And we can see urban centers really not doing well in terms of the employment opportunities, the quality of educational outcomes, and the general level of unemployment. And then on the left-hand side, you see the index of opportunities, or we call promising prospects. And here again, you see a very wide disparity. And there's a curious thing, if you blow out the map of London, and it shows that there is a lot of nuance in the data. While London has, as you can see from the chart on the left, provides enormous amount of opportunity to improve your prospects in life by allowing you to go for jobs which are not available in other parts of the country, but also in terms of educational outcomes and income mobility. It also, at the same time, has very high level of youth unemployment and poverty. So it's a tale of contrast. But at the same time, you see parts of the country like South Yorkshire or East of Scotland, which are faring poorly in both these categories. So it does show that we do need to make very targeted interventions. And I think that's why the topic of today is so interesting, because these local skills improvement program can be really targeted at where the issues lie. And if you go onto the Commission website, we have a data explorer tool, which, depending on the part of the country you come from, you can really deep dive into the issues and where some of the problems lie in your own geographical area. Another area which I wanted to highlight was about the percentage of needs. Now, we can see that 20% of needs are coming from the poorest section of a society, from the poorest socioeconomic backgrounds of people. And actually, the percentage of needs in all other socioeconomic categories is fairly similar. So clearly, we can see that we have the highest percentage of need population amongst people from poorer economic backgrounds. So given the backdrop that I've just painted, that the Commission is looking at in terms of data, we come up with 4 priority areas. And I wanted to highlight 2 of the areas which I think are very pertinent for today's conversation that you're going to be engaging in throughout the day, and which the Commission is particularly focused on. And one is about growing opportunities. As we know, rising tides lift all boats. If we can improve the economic prospects, and that's what I think Jonathan started at the beginning, saying, how can we make our country more attractive for investment? But across the country, and especially developing skills and talent. And finally, this thing about nurturing talent, both in terms of the routes into work, but once people get into work, how do we make sure that there is continuous development of their skills and talents to make sure that they grasp all the opportunities possible? So those are the 2 areas which I think are particularly pertinent for today's conversation. Now, talking about how do we develop and distribute talent? First, let me just talk about routes into work, and then we can talk about what happens in work. Now, in routes into work, clearly there's a lot more which needs to be done to make sure that our youth post 16 understand what are the options available to them. And the pathways can make a big difference. And we did look at, we published a report last year, which looked at, the value of different opportunities available to the youth. And we can see from data that those who have completed university or further education do have better income prospects throughout their life, which is not surprising. But at the end of the day, I think we need to make sure that the paths into work are really tailored depending on the skills and the potential of the individual, and not necessarily for everybody university is the right route. It could be technical education or apprenticeships. Now, that's what I talked about. We need to better signpost so that people make some informed choices about what career they want to pursue. And finally, I think we talked about apprenticeships, and what we can see is it's a very important route, but increasingly over the last few years, especially after the apprenticeship levy, there's been an increase in the degree level apprenticeships, which do not always target people at the lowest socioeconomic backgrounds. And we need to have more apprenticeships being made available at level 2 to 4, which does target people from the poorer background. And another thing we see is that the level of apprenticeships being offered by small, medium enterprises has really gone down. So that's another area to look at. And then if we then look at once you get into work and how do you progress, and I think that's a large part of what this conference is about, is how do employers engage with the youth at very early stages when they're making up their choices. And because the early steps do matter on where you enter the profession, and thereafter it does matter on what kind of skills and training for lifelong learning comes up. But these initial steps too often can determine really how far you progress in your career in life. So I think that's where this conference has a really big part to play, to look at what are the best practices which are available across the various industries that are represented here today, and the various bodies which are represented. Because I think the industry engagement is so critical to promote social mobility, and as I was saying, that the involvement of employers working at very early stages with the students coming out of their schools at 16 plus, and that early intervention can make a big difference. Here I would just like to recollect the recent conversations I've had with some of the more professional services firms like Deloitte and PwC. They've done a tremendous amount of work in really tapping into schools, creating a feeder talent for their internship programs, and going into very difficult areas like Bradford, and working with difficult schools and people with lowest socioeconomic background students who have been on free school meals, to see how they can improve the talent pool coming into their internship program. So I think that kind of level of engagement is critical. And then, I think what we need to think about is how do we bring that into the regional plans which are being developed, and how are the employers going to think differently about skills-based recruitment and hiring practices. So I think there's a lot that this conference and the knowledge that exists in this virtual room can tap into. So finally, in closing, I would say, that policymakers, employers, and learning providers have a key role to play alongside the government to ensure that opportunity for lifelong learning is available for all. And I think at today's event, I hope that you managed to get a good set of best practices being shared, and clearly some policy interventions suggested, which can help make this country go a long way to becoming a more fairer society for all. Thank you.
Parminder, thank you so much indeed. Really interesting. I love the phrase about local context matters. That's almost a hashtag in itself, and I think it's a really important one to bear in mind. Also, growing talent for sustainable, high quality employment. And all of that brings with it, not just for employers, but for students and individuals, really, really keen. And I think if you're going to really tackle social mobility, you've got to really target, those people that you want in those cohorts. I had a couple of questions for you, though. And one relates to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And clearly there's a strong link here, particularly around the UN SDG. So for those of you that haven't heard of SDGs, just go to Google and type in SDGs, it'll come up. But number 8 is around gaining high quality employment. And of course, we have number 1, which is around no poverty, and number 5, which is linked to social mobility. So I just wondered, in your experience, is there enough done to link the work that you do and the local context in terms of skills and education to SDGs, and what more can we do?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think you raise some interesting linkages between all of these topics, and what we're seeing in data as people can go through our State of the Nation report is, while UK as a whole, if you just look at over the past decades, hasn't done any differently to most OECD countries, because sometimes there is this narrative that social mobility in this country is broken. But if you look at data, that isn't the case. But what we do see as a real issue is the lowest in the socioeconomic background, and the lowest strata of the society, those who are really stuck. And that's where the interventions are most critical. And that's where we see the least amount of improvement in their social mobility indices, whether it's about employment, it's about educational outcomes, it's about income. So, I mean, that's where, and the progress has been very slow. And I think that's where the local interventions do matter, because, when you're in a society, in a local geography, there is better awareness of the interventions which are required. And I think more devolution in that sense to really allow the freedom for making the interventions which are really going to make that difference in that community, and especially in that socioeconomic strata of that community. And I think that if we can make a difference there, then I think we can go a long way in improving all of these indices, as you mentioned, in terms of sustainable development goals as well.
Parminder, thank you. Question from Michelle. So what are your thoughts about work readiness of young people and feedback from employers that indicates we've slipped backwards since the pandemic, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds? How can employers better work with education to improve prospects, particularly around a positive transition into the world of work?
No, I think last year was the first year the report came out post-pandemic, and we could see across the board, all indices around educational attainment slipping, but the gap has grown in that sense between the poorest in the society and the more advantaged. So clearly more targeted interventions are required, and I think there is a concern about readiness of and the skills available in terms of readiness of our youth to take on more opportunities. But that's where I think that engagement at a very early stage is critical. I gave the example of PwC, and I've actually met some of their interns and heard their personal stories. I do think, I think it's a bit of a myth that the youth are less engaged today than they were in the past. I think every generation thinks that the younger generation isn't as good or as diligent as we were, but I do think they have the same desires and aspiration to improve their standing in life, but they do need help, and I think pandemic has been difficult for all families, and especially more so for those who have been at the bottom of the rung. So I think that's where I think this partnership between the various providers, the learning providers, the employers, to engage very early on in the schooling system to give people the help and the support. Because I do think there's as I said, one thing we say in our commission is that talent is very evenly spread across the country, but opportunities are not. And I think it's about finding the right talent. And this isn't about level playing field in terms of, we need to, give people a start when they're not ready, but it is just to make sure employees are there to do a good business for their shareholders and their key stakeholders. And they want to make sure that they have the best talent to deliver that. And I know in Shell, we just recently started an apprenticeship program and be specifically targeting, the communities we don't reach, so that we can reach into the talent pool which we've been not exposed to as an organization. And it's a commercial imperative rather than just the morally the right thing to do, in my view.
Thank you so much. Such a comprehensive answer as well. But you're not quite off the hook yet, Parminder. So one more question I've got here for you. You talked about small, medium enterprises, and we all know that, it's a bit of a struggle for SMEs. Often the person that is running the SME, particularly if they're micro, is, bottle washer, salesman, accountant. They wear all these different hats, and so, maybe going out and engaging in apprenticeships and training and all of that's really, really difficult for them. So I guess my question is, you mentioned the reduction in SMEs offering apprenticeships or SME participation in apprenticeships. What would be your top tips to turning that around and increasing participation, and what should, training providers and that be engaged with?
Yeah, I'm no expert at this, but, I do believe, given the lack of resources and the priorities the SMEs have in terms of just keeping their head above water in these difficult economic circumstances, the easier we can make it for them in terms of the level of paperwork involved, the level of bureaucracy in getting the funds. And I think that's what really stops people, because if I just put on the hat of being in and talking to SMEs, I think they're grateful for help and resources to keep their business afloat and actually progress. So I think if this can be a real enabler for their business success, they would embrace it wholeheartedly. But if it comes with reams of paperwork and difficulty in accessing those funds to be able to employ people in these apprenticeship programs, then I think they would not go for it. So I think I'd be very keen to see what comes out of these conversations in terms of policy framework and policy recommendations we can give to the government bodies to make it easier for SMEs to wholeheartedly embrace apprenticeships, in my view.
Great, thank you. And there is a comment from Karen in the chat, actually. So she says, thanks for your insights. You speak a lot about large corporate behaviours, but what about SMEs, particularly in geographic areas with lower economic prospects? And I guess in part, you've answered that. You would add in response to Karen's question there, Karen's comment.
No, thank you. And I think what as I said, very keen, and as Commission, we are always looking at what are the policy advocacies we can make on our behalf, and any good ideas are welcome, because I think SMEs are lifeblood of any economy, especially in the more regional and local economies. And if they're not engaged in this process and we leave it only to large corporates, then we'll leave a large section of the economy and the society behind. So they need to be part of the process.
And finally, on this point, particularly around SMEs, Mark Stowe, he thanks you for your presentation. But the question I guess that he has is, how important do you think it is that we drive impartial careers, education, advice and guidance into the education system as a vehicle to connect education to the broader labour market? And is the current model of careers education working?
Well, I think a lot needs to be done, because I think the level of understanding that the youth has about the options and, what are the life values or lifetime opportunity they get by pursuing one path versus the other, a better understanding of their own skills and aspirations. And I think that's where a lot more work, and that's a partnership between employers as well, working with the school system and not just waiting for them to be churned out of the schools and, through the apprenticeship providers into them. And the more that outreach happens on both sides, and I think that there's a lot of misinformation or lack of understanding of the types of opportunities available, especially on the apprenticeship routes. I think people intuitively understand the universities, but they don't understand that not every university course is going to be giving them the same employment opportunities. So they might end up with a debt without being immensely employable, and they might have better prospects by going down a technical apprenticeship path. And that's where, the conversations between FE colleges and the employers to give a both-way think about what kind of skills are the employers looking for in a particular geography, depending on the industrial makeup of a geography, then helps to create the kind of opportunities which are employable from get-go. So I think there's a lot more which needs to be done but it's such a big thing that it cannot be dealt with at a national level because, as I said, the issues are quite different. So I think that's where a conference like this, which really is talking about local skills and improvement program and regional priorities do matter because the solution might be very different from one geography to another.
Parminder, thank you so much. It's really interesting. Last week, I was in Indonesia and Malaysia with a group of UK skills and training providers. Mm-hmm. And, everything you've said so far, actually, we could be in Malaysia or Indonesia because, sure, almost every single country that I work with suffers with the same issues of this connectivity between, employers and the training providers and, intergovernment systems, and there's so much kind of disconnect actually between them all. And they don't really target the hard to reach cohorts that you're really after to make sure a real difference to social mobility. And like you say, the degree bit is easily understood. The skills bit is a completely different game. It's like a plate of spaghetti, and we keep presenting this spaghetti to employers, which kind of puts them off. So simplifying the system is part of that help. Just to pick up on a couple of closing comments then. So Claire comments that the reality is that conversations with SMEs have been ongoing for over a decade, and we have to find new ways of engaging. Mm-hmm. Completely endorse that. And social mobility data is very helpful. The Gatsby benchmarks are a great model to improve quality, but how do we get incentives to employers to engage, such as the NHS? And finally, then, Nicola, you just got in the wire there. The motivation to engage with more employers, both larger and SMEs, is a priority for awarding organisations and endpoint assessment organisations to ensure that the provision we develop is fit for purpose, more collaboration and a joined up approach on strategic policy drivers and national accountability programmes such as LSIPs working better together. We would see the traction we need for success. And I think we're going to be talking about some of that, Nicola. So stay with us. Parminder, it just leaves me to say huge thanks to you. A big round of applause, everybody, for Parminder. Great job, really interesting data. And we hope that kind of sets the scene for this morning's discussion. Parminder, thank you so much indeed.
Thank you once again for inviting me. Thanks, Jonathan. Good luck for the rest of the conference.
Bless you. Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. So, ladies and gentlemen, really interesting start. And, it is a kind of area that gets us thinking about, who are we aiming at? What's the local context? That lovely phrase, local context matters. And to help with some of that, we're going to be looking at levelling up provision and removing place-based barriers, addressing regional inequalities, driving social mobility and education attainment, and priorities for improving access to training in disadvantaged areas. And to help me do that, we have now a raft of 5 speakers, all from different brilliant backgrounds, but I'm just going to introduce them all quickly and then invite the first one up onto the podium, as it were. So Jen Nellis, who is the Senior Research Fellow from Oxford Brookes University. Emma Roberts, who I work with quite a lot, actually, Director of External Affairs at WorldSkills UK, whom we love. Matt Poynton, lead TUC and West Midlands Combined Authority Skills Partnership. Claire Paul, Assistant Director of Skills, Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority, and Charlotte Harrobin, who is the Chair of Cambridge and Peterborough LSIP and Chief Executive of Cambridgeshire Chamber of Commerce. So first up is Jen. Are you there, Jen?
Yep, I'm here.
We can hear you, Jen. Fantastic. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Oh, yeah, I didn't realize I had control. All right, here we go. You should be able to see me now.
Brilliant. Very good. No, very good morning to you. And just say next slide when you want to turn the slide. So over to you.
Thanks, Jen. I have no slides, so that's gonna make it your job easy.
Hey, we love that. Thank you.
Yeah, for such short remarks, I thought I'd keep it, sharp and short. So thanks so much for having me here. I want to start this session by kind of zooming in on one of the key actors in skills provision and localized employment strategy and governance, the further education colleges. So my work with the Innovation and Research Caucus and the Innovation Caucus before that, in partnership with the Productivity Institute sometimes and the Gatsby Foundation, has focused on understanding the role of further education and skills provision visioning, development, all of that. And particularly the mechanisms, like I've been focused on mechanisms and practices through which they engage with their communities and the economies around them to understand skills needs. So I'm kind of at that intersection of trying to understand the sort of what barriers might be in place for these sort of place-based types of development. And I just for fun, I wanted to frame my comments as a bit of a series of provocative statements that I hope that will, provoke thought, debate, spark conversation, hopefully. And these comments sort of try to challenge some of the perceptions about further education and their role in this that I've observed in the policy space, particularly those that suggest that colleges are underperforming in either their engagement or skills provision efforts. So I want to dig into that a little bit. And it's not to say that some aren't underperforming or that colleges couldn't stand to do kind of everything better, but I'd like to offer a bit of more nuanced view and kind of push back a little bit to suggest there might be other places that we can look for advantages. And note, just to say that these are based on research of only about 24 colleges in England, which is admittedly small, but we tried to make it a comparative sample. And I can put the link to the reports that some of these are based on in the chat afterwards. So first provocative statement is that colleges probably know more about their labor markets and skills needs than anyone else in the space, and I'm including industry here, which may be controversial, we'll see. Obviously, they have access to and analyze occupational data and employment data from a wide variety of sources, including government and private databases often. But I mean, that's just step one. They also typically have very strong links into industry, and not just associations or employer groups, et cetera, but have multiple, sometimes a larger number than you'd expect, of bilateral relationships with a wide variety of businesses. And that breadth is important, and I'll come back to it. In any given industry, they may have between dozens to hundreds of individual connections, which tallies to a lot of data points if you think about it. And so often, that's like they have really good depth and breadth, which means that they not only can see into specific industries, but across industries as well, which I think is a huge asset. They also often, I'd talk to colleges and they would say, we are industry. So they don't see a distinction between themselves and the industries that they have relationships with. That is that instructors, program directors, administrators, et cetera, have often been practitioners themselves and maintain links in those industries or have moved back and forth over their careers. So the upshot here of this sort of provocative statement I'd suggest is that LSIPs, among other things, were set up to provide a stronger conduit of information to colleges about emerging skills needs, to connect them with the employers that might need assistance or industries that might have skill gaps. But I think in many places, the degree to which that's already been done is underestimated. And that colleges are really well placed and kind of uniquely well placed in some cases because they sit at this nexus of governance and multiple industries to see trends, even trends that industry might not see, might not want to see, which is something I'll come back to, or that stem from an understanding of synergies between industries, which I think is important. So again, not saying that they know everything and have a crystal ball, but their position is quite unique. And I think as a result of that, where LSIPs can probably contribute most is in enabling coordination, co-creation, and innovation between stakeholders, rather than necessarily focusing as much on the sort of connection piece, which I think is interesting. That's provocative statement one. Provocative statement two is that colleges are shorter on opportunities to innovate than on innovation. So what I mean by that is that for any given challenge we can identify in the skills gap / provision space, colleges will typically have, and their leaders will typically have many ideas about how to solve them. Many of them that are quite, clever, innovative, resourceful. They have to be resourceful in a lot of ways. And the solutions don't always boil down to money or resources, although that would almost always be welcome. But it's interesting that, you know, various barriers prevent them from acting on these ideas about how to sort of reach businesses, how to provide for their specific needs, et cetera. And there's a lot of ways I could go with this, but I just want to suggest that responding to skills need increasingly, and I think in this day and age, requires flexibility. We have a quite rigid approach to understanding how to respond to skills that you know, is sometimes very prescribed and not responsive to what employers actually need sometimes. So, and that flexibility is really not something that colleges have in abundance in the current regulatory environment. So the upshot here is that I want to suggest that in some cases, you know, filling skills gaps and responding to employer needs doesn't require the creation of a full program of study in like a huge qualification, but could be delivered through mechanisms like bespoke modules, training programs at more experimental forms that that are harder to do in some ways. And the moves towards devolving the adult education budget, I think are one example of something that's helping to create more space for colleges to be more innovative at the local level and try and figure out what works. But there's a lot more that can probably be done there. Last provocative statement, it probably isn't that provocative, but that skills gaps are not purely a supply side problem. It shouldn't be provocative, but you never know. The problem is that I think that when, as from a policy side, we often frame it in those terms. You know, we talk about college underperformance, we talk about gaps in supply, et cetera, and what we can do better on the policy side. But responsibility probably shouldn't rest specifically on skills providers of all sorts, maybe not even just further education, for a bunch of reasons. So I think, again, important to mention that businesses play an important role. Right now, we know that there's been less investment in skills and training than there used to be. There just isn't as much happening in businesses or willingness to pay for it. And they're not always willing to pay to acquire the skills that they need, or are not willing to pay workers competitive rates for those skills. And because, you know, colleges don't operate in closed systems, the skills they do provide can and do bleed away as workers move to better opportunities. And so this is something that I think is really interesting and tied into the place-based element of this. And that's just a few examples I could get into in questions, et cetera. But from, you know, the upshot here is that from a policy perspective, we need to understand labor market dynamics and trends on both sides of the equation and appreciate those. You know, perhaps more needs to be done to support and encourage employers to step up and fill existing and future needs. And future needs is an important one, trying to plan ahead. And that is a bit of a resource problem from the business side. It's also worth noting that, you know, while LSIPs and other localized government programs covered fixed territories and geographies, again, it's not a closed system. And many of the challenges are playing out against a backdrop of broader industry trends and other skills geographies. And so keeping those in mind as well are important. In other words, I don't think it's not always going to be possible to solve everything locally. And it's not always going to be on the supply side that we need to think. Although even if we do want to talk about the supply side, there's some sort of complexity there that needs to be acknowledged as well. So I'm going to end it there, but I hope that was a good start to a conversation that should be interesting and varied.
It was indeed, Jen. Thank you. I love the fact that you talk about it not being the responsibility of just providers. I'm from an industry background, and I firmly believe that industry itself must do more. And I guess there is a challenge as well, because, you know, most industry will come along with a big bag of demands, and those demands aren't necessarily what the businesses that they sit within actually need to survive and grow and prosper and all of that. And there is a bit of a debate about some of that information sometimes, because it's all very well stamping your feet saying I want, but what you need may well be very different to that. And I think in part you're raising that point. So Jen, thanks very much. Stay with us though. I'm going to be coming back to you with some questions for sure. And our colleagues that are watching online, hopefully you're putting your questions down in ink there on the chat system. So thanks very much indeed. Next up, Emma Roberts, Director of External Affairs at the fabulous WorldSkills UK. Emma, a very good morning to you. Jen, if I could ask you to turn off your camera and we'll just concentrate on Emma. Thanks very much.
Amazing.
Emma.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan, for that kind introduction. It's great to be here on such an important kind of debate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how WorldSkills UK's programmes are actually helping with social mobility. I know that's a bold claim, but we're confident that we are doing that already. And I think it's important to recognise what works in this kind of area. So just to explain a little bit to start with, for those who aren't familiar with WorldSkills UK, we are a UK-wide skills charity. We work with employers, educators and governments across the UK. And we exist to do three things mainly. So firstly, raising standards in technical education and apprenticeships, and we do that through our access to kind of international best practice and benchmarking skills across the world, hence the name WorldSkills. We also champion future skills, so we're about pioneering the skills that are going to be needed tomorrow and making sure that young people know about careers in those areas. And we're about empowering young people to from any background to succeed in their career through technical education and apprenticeships. So as I mentioned, I want to talk about some of our programmes that are actually already helping with social mobility. And really, our programmes are fundamentally about helping young people get higher levels of skills. And I mean skills in the broadest sense. And some of the comments already have kind of prompted thoughts on those areas. So I mean technical skills, and our involvement in WorldSkills internationally means that we are kind of at the cutting edge of what technical skills in lots of different sectors looks like. We benchmark ourselves against global occupational standards, which are set by industry and reviewed every 2 years. So we have a really good sense of what technical skills are needed and share that across the UK. But also employability skills. And I know there was a question about that earlier. That's something that comes through really strongly in our programmes. And also mindset skills. So talking about post-COVID, the resilience that young people need, that is a really strong theme in our programmes as well. And I think it's the combination of all three that is really helpful in driving social mobility. There's also a fantastic link with the Social Mobility Commission. It was great hearing from Parminder. But I guess one of the reasons that I feel confident in saying that we are helping with social mobility is because we've had a fantastic endorsement from the chair of the Social Mobility Commission, Alan Francis, who is a big advocate of our programmes. When he was principal at Oldham College, he was very involved in WorldSkills UK's competition programmes and also made sure that Oldham College was a member of our Centre of Excellence programme, which I'll come on to a little bit later. And when he was talking in Parliament, he very kindly said, when asked if there was a programme that works and that needed more attention to be more widely used, he very kindly referenced WorldSkills UK as something that really helps with social mobility and that more people should know about. So I guess that's partly why I'm here, to help spread the word. So how do we actually do it, I guess, is the main question. And our main programme is running skills competitions, and we do that on a national and an international basis. So next month, the registration for our national cycle of competitions will open, and that will hopefully see thousands of young people from all over the UK on apprenticeships, studying courses at college, entering our competitions across sort of 45 different skill areas. And that gives them the opportunity to stretch their technical skills, benchmark where they are against other people within their college, within their training provider, but also across the rest of the UK. They go through various stages during the year, and then in November each year we hold our national finals, which pits the 400 to 500 best young people in their skills against each other, with the chance to be sort of crowned the top in the country. And for around 100 of those young people, they will then be selected to take part in our international squad and get the opportunity to train for 18 months to compete internationally in their technical skill. So that's the process we use. But what we've understood through doing skills competitions is that it gives young people an opportunity. It gives them motivation in their technical skill. It gives them new employability skills. They have to learn things like time management in order to do our competitions well. They have to be resilient because sometimes they'll get knocked back and they have to pick themselves up again and try again. And it gives them an enthusiasm and an ability to kind of assess their own skill level that they wouldn't normally get in the course of their studying and their apprenticeship. And it's those factors that are so important to social mobility. Now, we know that competitions can put some people off, and that's really important if we're trying to be inclusive as well. So it's not just about competition. I mentioned a programme that many colleges and training providers across the UK are now involved in, called the Centre of Excellence. And this is actually a CPD programme for educators that World Skills UK runs. And it gives educators the tools to use our competition methodology in the classroom, but without necessarily students having to enter competitions. So for young people that really don't want to put themselves forward, they can still benefit if their educator has been involved in our CPD programme by doing very kind of low-key pressure testing in the classroom, and even actually just competing against themselves and what they have scored in previous assessments. And we've found that that's also been incredibly successful at raising levels of aspiration and commitment to studying, so that those young people, those learners, are really benefiting from that programme. But again, we know, we absolutely don't have all the answers to this. And one of the things that we're really aware of is that there are still lots of barriers within the system. So I really liked Parminder's graphic around relative mobility and absolute mobility. So I guess lots of our programs are about raising the general level of standards and the general level of aspiration for everybody, that absolute mobility. But we know that within that there are barriers for particular underrepresented groups. There's still a lot of gender stereotyping in the type of skills that young people take up, and we have a lot of underrepresentation on ethnicity grounds as well. So we are working hard to understand that better and to increase participation in our programs, because having that evidence that it does work and it does help people get on in their careers and gain the right kind of employability skills and mindset skills that will take them through life. We want to make sure that as many people as possible can benefit from it, and that we're driving that relative social mobility as well. So I guess my main message is, if this resonates with you, if there are employers, educators, local authorities on the conference today that like what I've described, then please do get in touch. We've got content on our website that you can access free of charge. We've got Mindset Masterclass that I can provide a link to, but we're also really keen to extend our Centre of Excellence programme to anyone who'd like to take in part. It's free to access and it's unlimited in terms of how many people can get involved. So it can't be better than that, surely. So back to you, Jonathan.
Emma, thank you so much indeed. And what a whirlwind tour to a brilliant organisation. We celebrate you worldwide. Of course, I've personally been over to skills competitions in Bangkok, Philippines, all sorts of different places. So we kind of see you moving around the world, spreading the message as well, which is absolutely brilliant. And what I really love is that you are raising that bar for everybody. There's no kind of leaving anybody out, and that includes the staff of the organisations that you work with, with all your specialist trainers and all of that. So really, really well done. Carry on that great work. We'll be with you on that journey. So, but don't go away, Emma. We are coming back to you soon with some questions. Moving on, though, we have to go over to Matt Poynton. He is the lead at the TUC and West Midlands Combined Authority Skills Partnership. Matt, a very good morning to you. I hope you're well.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
We can indeed, yes.
Excellent.
Do carry on, yeah. Over to you.
Okay, Okay, thanks. Well, I'll keep it short. And what I'll do is I'll divide it into two parts. The first part being I'll explain the project that I'm working on, because I think a lot of people won't be familiar with it, and they won't be familiar perhaps with the methodology behind it. And then after that, go on to a few of my thoughts around some of the questions that this event today is kind of focusing on. So I'm the lead on the TUC West Midlands Combined Authority Skills Partnership. And what that is it's a pioneering partnership between a combined authority and the trade union movement. And it came about in 2020. So some people here might know about the Union Learning Fund and Union Learn, which was a national project that had been going for many, many years, I think about 15 years, all across England. And then there's also a Welsh version and a Scottish version as well. But that was axed by Gavin Williamson in 2019. And what that left was a kind of gap that the West Midlands Combined Authority was the first combined authority in the country to say, actually, we find great value in working with the unions on the skills agenda. Can we continue this? And so using some of their skills budgets, they set up this partnership. And what it is I'm employed by the TUC. I'm not a provider, so I don't really put on training. I might put on some taster sessions or that kind of thing. But what we do is we act as the bridge between learners or community organizations or employers and the combined authority and the training that they provide. It's not a big project, but it's been very successful. It was a year initially, it's been renewed for 2 years, and now we're talking about renewing further. And what I think is really telling, it's a testament to actually Andy Street, the Metro Mayor of the West Midlands, because he's a Conservative, and as you know, traditionally, the trade unions, that's not been their party of choice. But he's saying, look, there's value in working with these guys. He's gone beyond party lines, and we've done that, and we have a really, really good partnership with him. And I think that's a testament to him and also the trade union movement. The other thing is it's been copied elsewhere in the country. So the second one was in the Sheffield City region. We've got a much larger project in the North of Tyne Combined Authority area. And then there's also one in West Yorkshire now. Liverpool City region and Sheffield City region both have bespoke multiply focused projects. And I can talk a little bit about that as well. And there's now a GLA one as well. So it's something that's spreading across the country. Ideally, we'd like a project in every combined authority, which would be brilliant. The only problem is, of course, then what about the people who aren't in those combined authority areas? And, you know, we're talking about leveling up and removing place-based barriers, but that is a real challenge because, of course, a lot of our unions operate regionally. So, for example, with me, it tends to be in the Midlands, and they don't make a distinction between a member who is, you know, living in Coventry or a member that's living in Nuneaton. You know, they may be working in the same workplace, but actually one is within the remit of the combined authority and one isn't. So that is a challenge, and that's devolution has been brilliant because it drives some of this innovative thinking, such as the combined authority and TUC skills partnership, but it also creates a new inequality as well, which has been a bit of a challenge for some of our regions. So that's that. Looking at some of the questions that have been talking about today, and what I should say as well is, as I do wear another hat, is that I'm the chair of the Workers' Educational Association, which is, been going since 1903, and it's the largest adult ed charity in the country. And we are a provider, but we also do a lot of innovative work around particularly community education. And I think that's one thing I want to start with, because we've looked at, you know, who knows the learners best, and some earlier speaker was talking about colleges knowing more. I guess the trade union approach is that we're a bottom-up organisation, and so it's the learners and it's the people who know what they want best, but what they don't know is how to navigate the system. So our essential model is that people will come to us with their training needs, and then we try and find a solution for them. And that's where we act as a bridge. So we are not the solution. We don't put on the course for them, but we know how to navigate the system to find that solution. And I think learner-centered provision is really important. And what we're getting, particularly since COVID, is people are talking about mindset skills, you know, mental health, all those kind of skills about combating isolation. And a lot of that is combated through community education. But because it doesn't really directly lead to employability, and of course, some community education is dealing largely with the retired population, who, although they don't have necessarily an employability need, they still can contribute really valuably to society, and they still have, you know, issues around isolation and mental health. We struggle sometimes to find the provision that people want because it doesn't match the priority needs of the combined authority or of the Department for Education. So, you know, what we would say is we want to see more mindset skills provided and more community education, because that is what people are saying they want. That is what they're saying their need is, but they're struggling to be listened to sometimes. Another aspect I want to talk about is addressing regional inequalities and driving social mobility. We talk about improving access to disadvantaged areas. And this is something that our partnership has done a lot of, in that what we do have is we have people on the ground. So we have people in workplaces across the country. And our model is we have union learning reps, which are not like traditional workplace reps. So it's not about banging on the table and asking for more pay, although as is very visible, we do that. But the union learning rep is more like a workplace learning mentor, where they are the person you can go to in work to get signposting. And they are the person that, you know, can then go away and they know a bit about the skills system, so they know where to direct people, and they can also support people whilst they're at work. And those are a position that's protected in law. So it's a really valuable resource, because some employers don't always see the need for training. They do see skills as a cost, not a benefit. But what we have is a presence in workplaces, and we make that work. And actually, you know, when we do something, often the employer sees the value and is very positive. An example I can think of at the top of my head is Warburton's in Wednesbury. It's the bakery. A lot of people know the bread and the crumpets. And they were making some redundancies. And there was only about 20 or so redundancies. So it wasn't triggering a HR1. So the Combined Authority didn't even know about it. But what they did is they asked the Baker Food and Allied Workers Union, which is the union that was in there, they asked us to come in, and we gave one-to-one support for everyone and signposted them to the local authority provision. But the employer was so impressed that they said, oh, well, we'd like to work more with you. We've done similar stuff with Royal Mail, even though, you know, the relationship between the union, the Communication Workers Union, and Royal Mail at the moment, it has been a bit strained. And if you know, we all know about the strikes, that's why. But this is one area where they could come together. And in fact, a really nice story is, despite the fact that the employer and the union have had strained relations, one thing they saw a value with is mental health support. And so the union put on mental health first aid classes for union reps and the management. And it was one area where they could work together really well, and of course support the whole of the workforce. But we don't just work in workplaces. So you know, our members are out in their communities. And one of the great strengths of the partnership that I'm lead in is that we've managed to connect with community groups that the Combined Authority have struggled to connect with. So only last week, I was down in Digbeth in Birmingham with a group called SOS Education, which operates purely within the Somali community. Traditionally, they're seen as a hard-to-reach community. I would say that's not the case, But what is interesting about the Somalis is they're one of the more recent arrivals to the country, so they're not as embedded in networks as, say, some of the older communities like Afro-Caribbean or Pakistani Indian. And they're traditionally a very conservative community, so it's quite, particularly for women and SOS education, it's purely dealing with women. It's quite difficult for them to get out and access the opportunities. But what SOS education have done is created a space where it's safe for Somali women to come. They can bring their kids and engage in education, in skills work. And so we've come in, we've done, I think, 4 learning days with them so far. And what we do is we talk to them and say, well, what do you want? And again, often what they want is stuff about about mental health. There's a big issue. Well, I wouldn't say it's a big issue, but they really want stuff around domestic violence. And where we can be invaluable, because, it's not our place to tell BAME communities how to live. But what we do have is have the connection. So they said, okay, we want to do something around domestic violence. So we brought the National Centre for Domestic Violence in, who we've already got a relationship with. And then we did sessions on that. And then we also did sessions on basic skills. And that way, we brought education providers in. And now you've got these women accessing skills opportunities provided by the Combined Authority that they would not be accessing otherwise. And I think it's a really, really positive example. I could go on. I've seen in the chat people are saying, are there any examples to work that you do? Yes, there are. We have a website, and there's some case studies on there. But I'm also happy to chat to anybody, afterwards or whenever, about what we do and about how we can get involved. And of course, I noticed we've got speakers from Cambridge and Peterborough, and we've got Andy Burnham on later, and they are 2 areas that don't have a partnership project yet. So if you want to chat to us about it, we're more than happy.
Matt, thanks so much indeed. Really enthusiastic. But what's really important, and I often find this is the case as well, the theme around community education, really getting down to the grassroots level, and having boots on the ground, really makes a difference in terms of that engagement, encouragement, participation. And you're able to go after, the right kind of employers, the right kind of students, or, reach the hard to reach cohorts and all of that. And boots on the ground makes all the difference in your experience as well, by the sounds of it. So really great to hear about the skills partnership, and thank you so much indeed for sharing that. Again, just like Jen and Emma, don't go away. We're going to come back to you hopefully with some questions. Hopefully everybody online is thinking about those questions and getting them into the chat. We've already got a few there, but we're going to come back to you. Now we must move on to the next speaker. So thanks very much, Matt. I'd like to invite Claire Paul onto the podium now. So Claire is the Assistant Director of Skills for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority. Claire, a very good morning to you.
Good morning. I think Charlotte's kicking off for us because we're double heading this, if that's okay.
Perfect. Okay. So, Charlotte Harabin, Chair of the Cambridge and Peterborough LSIP, a Chief Executive of Cambridgeshire Chamber of Commerce. There we go.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And it's really important to say that Claire and I, as usual, are walking hand in hand to represent the great work, but also some of the opportunities where we could do better things across our wider geography. So, as you say, I'm the Chief Executive of the Cambridgeshire Chambers of Commerce. I am also the Project Executive for our Local Skills Improvement Plan. And Claire, would you like to just introduce yourself thoroughly?
Yes, I'm 3 months into my role as the Assistant Director for Skills at Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, but I confess a prejudice of 30 odd years as an employer and 10 years as a Director of Leadership and Talent for the BBC, where I took them from 6 to 1,000 apprentices a year. So apprentices are my passion, as is social justice. So as Charlotte said, if we hadn't invented LSIPs, I think we would still be holding hands because of the way we believe that we should work together.
Thank you, Claire. So to begin with, and we're really just going to focus on 2 key slides. We want to just bring to light actually what does our region look like? What are those opportunities? But also, as I say, where are those challenges that in partnership we do need to overcome? And I think it's probably fair to say when you hear brand Cambridgeshire, in most people's minds, you will think of affluence, you will think of knowledge intensive industries. And we do very proudly boast two of the fastest growing cities in the country through Cambridge and Peterborough. We are able to publish the most patents in the country, and we are also by density world leading. So Cambridge is the #1 science and technology supercluster in the whole world. That is something quite phenomenal and something that we're exceptionally proud of. We've got fabulous growing sectors in advanced manufacturing, life sciences, digital and IT and agri-tech. But of course, they could not exist on their own. It's really important that we have sectors to enable that growth, that we're able to build new properties to be able to expand, that we're able to look after people, that we're able to care for our residents. Our landscape's very diverse. Peterborough famed for being where the brick was invented and where brick manufacturing was housed with brilliant connectivity. Huntingdonshire, famous for its manufacturing prowess with great connectivity with Felixstowe running the A14 across the country and into the Midlands and beyond. Cambridge, very famed for its knowledge intensive industries and fantastic networks that are extremely collaborative. And of course, Fenland, famed for agri-tech, producing a huge amount of food, but we also boast a wide range of very vibrant market towns and beautiful places to live. So, as I say, you hear Cambridgeshire and no doubt you will think of affluence. And actually, I've had the benefit of working across large geographies in the UK, predominantly the Midlands and the wider east of England, and living in the Northwest and Yorkshire. But I would say that no other geography is quite as diverse and quite as unique as what we have with the two sides of the coin. So I've presented to you there those global opportunities and the things that we're exceptionally proud of. But Claire, I think we'll now explore perhaps some of the stark inequalities that we face.
Yes, this is not on the press releases for Cambridgeshire normally, but if you look at, there's a point on the map in our region where just a few miles apart, there are two sub-regions, one being Fenland and one being South Cambridgeshire. And if you look at deprivation indices for the UK in terms of out of 317, Fenland is 237th. It's a pretty deprived area of the country. South Cambridgeshire is 16. That's the level of difference, the stark inequalities that we face. And between those two, a disparity of 27% in income. I mean, if you look at education, the world's education elite, apologies Oxford, resides in Cambridge, but yet some of the poorest levels of education attainment. I mean, 16 plus population with no qualifications, 26% in Fenland with a national average of 18%. So there are stark inequalities that we have to deal with, not just the kind of global aspirational Cambridge story. Can we change the slide? Because this is the nub of why Charlotte and I are sitting here together. Because I guess I bring to this party quite a lot of pain and experience as an employer in this world. And one of the things I felt very strongly when I was engaging with this, I used to lead the BBC's talent and kind of workforce development, apprenticeships, all that side of thing, was that it was full of initiatives and it was full of things that came and went. It was full of organisations chasing government money. This is my provocative statement here. Whereas actually, the way I saw it and the way that Charlotte and I are developing how we're working together in Cambridgeshire is to try and design this as an ecosystem where there are a variety of lenses that have to come together and work together. So the learner's perspective, absolutely, the employer's perspective, the provider's perspective across HE and FE, and also the communities and growing a sense of place. So on the left-hand side, what we've described, it's not perfect science this, but it's what I call the kind of talent value chain, the skills value chain. If we want to get this right, what things have to work together so there are no gaps? So particularly when we come to social mobility, people from less advantaged backgrounds, those first three, the inspiration, the engagement and the pre-employment opportunities, the things that we know to get people a foot on the ladder, they are critical. And then how do you develop that ladder through? And in particular, Charlotte and I are looking at sector-based approaches to this, but we could look at place-based approaches as well. So that ecosystem, local context matters, regional leadership of it really matters as well. So Charlotte, you'll pick up on a few things around that.
Absolutely, thank you, Claire. And for us, I think this is about hiding the wiring. We need people to view this as a holistic life cycle and not scattergun initiatives. How do we make this make sense so that when I'm sat in front of an employer, I'm not bamboozling them with, partner X, partner Y, this scheme and that scheme. Really, our employers don't care about the various pots, the various initiatives. Of course, behind the scenes, various stakeholders will have to adhere to certain regulations, legislation and guidance to be able to deliver taxpayers' funding in a careful way. But our employers care about the how. They care about that long-term vision, security, consistency, and they want people to speak their language. And I see our role really critical. We're at the centre of both local government, our employers, and our education providers. And it really is about bringing that team together. So it's really important that we've got that place-based leadership, that we're all coming together where possible to agree a consistent message and deliver good with the tools that we have. But it's important that we place our employers at the very heart of these initiatives, or else, what is the vision? What is the inspiration for those people that benefit from some of the courses, some of the training, if they can't see the end opportunity? There's a great point was made earlier regarding inward investment, and in my experience, it's often been able to provide a skilled talent pool, access to innovation, R&D, and great places to live, which tend to win people that want to come and invest in our place. So it's really important that we ensure that for inward investment and future growth prospects, that we're able to make sure that we've got that talent pool ready and align with the growth sectors, but also those enabling sectors moving forwards. It was also highlighted earlier on the importance, I guess, of larger business and the supply chain. And it's, really important that we've got those cornerstone employers. But what we mustn't do is allow the 95% of applicants that perhaps may be unsuccessful to get into some of those very prestigious schemes and prestigious organisations. How do we make sure that we then don't lose that really amazing cohort of people who are excited and do want to engage in their local workplace and connect them to the wider supply chain? And for businesses, we do have to have that soft guiding hand to say, you do have to be in it to win it. This isn't just an education problem. It's not just a recruiter and a business problem. You've got to be in it to win it. And I think there's some brilliant examples where smaller businesses do come together, and I don't think it's an unwillingness to invest in training, but it's really quite difficult being able to face some of the headwinds, some of the inflationary pressures that a lot of our smaller businesses do today. So more of the carrot and less of the stick. But Claire, I'll hand back over to you to outline how you see the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to say with this is that it's not either or in terms of how do you, drive social mobility, how do you improve productivity? These two things go hand in hand. And what Charlotte and I are trying to do is build an ecosystem where everything we do, we look at building opportunity for those from less advantaged areas, but also we do it through the lens of building productivity and increasing GVA. So some of the key things I think are really important and really exciting. This is actually an opportunity as well as a challenge. Is if you look at the level of funding that's available out there, it's not just public funding, it's employer funding, it's university funding, it's DWP funding, it's health funding, it's DFE. There's a huge amount of funding piling into this area. And actually getting that aligned around a common purpose. Charlotte and I absolutely believe if there's a game changer in skills, it's that. That we have one common purpose and we don't have things scattered all over the place, perhaps less than the sum of their parts. That leads you to much more of a strategic commissioning along, if you look at the left-hand side, say if you take that as a sector, what provision have you got in the area? What do you need to commission? What are the levels of funding you need to pull together collectively, not as individual organisations to deliver that? Critically as well, and it goes back, I think, to some of the things that Jen was saying earlier, is how we use that power, that commissioning power and place-making power to support learner-provider sustainability. Because certainly in our area, actually ensuring that our providers have got enough to actually make a good business, a good living, deliver economies of scales and high quality is a challenge. And we can help and support them as much as we possibly can in terms of investing in those that are really good. So taking this as an ecosystem leadership opportunity, I think is critical to what we both think.
Thank you, Clara. I think our concluding message would be, for us, this is perhaps oversimplifying it, but we truly believe that this is about a quality partnership. We've got to be really honest about what's the reciprocal value. As we highlighted earlier on, you know, smaller businesses in particular are not unwilling to invest in training, but we've got to have empathy and to understand what we can do to enable that investment to come forwards. We've got to make sure that everybody has got their fair share, and our local skills improvement plan, we see it as the North Star. It's the roadmap, but actually our role, as Jen highlighted earlier on, is very much to coordinate, encourage, share best practice, and ensure that we all come together as one region to deliver the best value that we possibly can. So, Jonathan, we hope that we've given you a good insight into what Cambridgeshire and Peterborough has to offer, some of the hurdles that we're trying to overcome, but the key thing is we're doing it hand in hand across a number of stakeholders across our wider region. So thank you.
You have massive bags of enthusiasm. Love it. And I love the connected and common purpose. I think it's brilliant. One of the things I always think is missing from the skills system is a guiding hand for those that, you know, want to get involved, or actually maybe they don't know they want to be involved because, you know, they look at the system and think that's not for me, it's too complicated, and sometimes they just need a walkthrough and somebody to hold their hand and love them a bit. And the place-based leadership that you provide with your collaboration, you know, clearly has a big impact locally for everybody, and it doesn't matter what the cohort. And I love the focus as well. Of course, I would, because I mentioned it earlier, on inward investment and, you know, growth sectors and things like that. You know, and we do have to look after those sectors which are not growing necessarily, but are the base of what we do. But, you know, there's a lot of new technology and innovation coming along, and we've got to keep a watch on that as well and try and work out, you know, in the future, how many of what are we going to need. So I'm really, really grateful for that. Now, we do have just a couple of minutes for questions, and there was a couple in the chat. So if I could ask Jen, Emma, Matt, Claire and Charlotte to be online just for a moment. There aren't many questions, but we got one or two.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, yeah.
If I could just point your direction, the Q&A, there are quite a few questions, starting with Andrew Eldred in the Q&A.
Thanks so much. I can't see them, not appearing on my screen.
Shall I start to read some out? Shall I read out 3 to start?
No,
off?
I just needed to refresh. That was all. So there we are. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to pick up. There's 1 or 2 in the chat, and then I'll come to the Q&A ones if that's okay. But let me just find my place again. It's not easy watching all these screens. I've got 7 screens open here.
Jonathan, just while you're looking at that, could I just say one thing, which I think as a slightly, you know, mild, hopefully humorous, but I think the skills system, if anybody likes Hitchhiker's Guide, we should all kind of invent a skills Babel fish where we could put it in somebody's ear and translate, particularly employers, and translate the skills system for them. I think that would be a very good addition.
Brilliant, love it. Yeah, fantastic. Moving on to the questions, Peter asks, he says there's always a lot of mention of skill shortages and skills gaps, but according to the employer skills survey, skills utilisation is the biggest issue. Why isn't skills utilisation higher up the agenda? And that was a question that came up when Jen was talking. So Jen, do you want to pick that up?
I don't know. That's an excellent question, and I think it's one that we need to think a little bit about. And I will posit this, and I wonder if other panelists have other ideas. But there's a language that we use as we talk about these things, and we do default to skills gaps, even though, as another commenter mentioned, that sometimes we're not talking about skills, we're talking about qualifications, we're talking about other types of attributes that aren't skills or qualifications. And so, you know, there is that element to it as well, so that, you know, businesses might not be thinking about that as much, and neither are we.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to quickly comment on that? Otherwise, we'll go to the next question. Okay, Lewis has asked, how can we build on the growing pace of devolution within England to enhance place-based skills provision? Who wants to pick that up? Thank you. Charlotte? Claire, sorry, Claire.
Yeah, no, it's just one thought from me on that, which I think is a kind of a macro thought rather than, I mean, there's loads of individual things about, you know, further devolution and things that we could talk about. But in principle, the coming together, the fact that if there is strategic leadership regionally, then I think actually the things that go with that in terms of the funding, the commissioning and the ability to shape the region with all the tools that you have around skills is incredibly important. I mean, it's really still very fragmented for an awful lot of us. I can see Andy, and obviously, you know, Manchester and the West Midlands are somewhat ahead of others. But this, you know, 19 plus 16 to 18 apprenticeships, boot camps, whatever it is, enabling the region to come together with strategic leadership so they can play those things like a musical instrument which works as one and plays one piece of music. But as one example, if you take boot camps, you know, we're regionally commissioning against that, and also they're nationally commissioning against it, and they're not connected. So the idea that there is a regionally focused approach, frankly, is a bit bonkers in my simple language. So there are those things about if regional leadership really means regional leadership, then actually the trust and the ability to be able to manage that, I think, is pretty critical.
Thank you. And Jen, I can see you've come in with your hand up.
Just a super quick thought is in our experience and our research, what we found is that there was a lot of unevenness in the like boldness with which places were leveraging the sort of devolved powers that they had. So some places were like gung-ho and were being really super innovative, and others were just basically doing the same old, but just different. The power resided in different places. And I think that it's just time in a lot of ways, the demonstration effect of other places, an encouragement that you can be more innovative and you don't have to play by the same old rules when you have that devolved ability, is something that I think it just sort of plays out. But that's hopefully more boldness will emerge as people get more comfortable with it.
Thank you so much, Jen. Earlier on, Martin Jones asked the question, what is the labour market problem question which LSIPs are the answer for? That's a challenging, simple question. What is the labour market problem question which LSIPs are the answer for? Anyone want to respond to that at all? Otherwise, I'll just move on. I think you've kind of answered some of that this morning from lots of different angles. So I don't think we've not answered it, but no, okay, no volunteers. I'm just conscious of time. I need to move on. Hello, Jen. Some of the statements are certainly provocative. Two questions. Was your relatively upbeat assessment? What was your relatively upbeat assessment of college engagement with industry based on feedback from the colleges themselves, or was there any supporting confounding feedback from employers? And secondly, did you look at all the business sectors or just a selection?
Yeah, that question, it also sort of asked about whether it was SMEs that we like. This sounded like it was more appropriate for larger employers. The fact was that we focused mostly on colleges themselves in this round. In previous rounds, we talked to employers, and that we have lots of exciting, interesting things that came out of that. But the most interesting thing was that I had expected there to be more relationships with larger employers, and those were there. But the hundreds and thousands of relationships were with SMEs, and that creates all sorts of problems, as you're undoubtedly aware. And as far as industries went, because we spoke with, in that wave, 16 different colleges, and each one of them had different sort of styles of engagement. Some of them had very close relationships with specific industries, and those were quite well developed. Others were more generalist and engaged with lots of different ones. And so we got a really interesting insight across all sorts of things like healthcare, infrastructure, so rail, for example, high tech, service economy, construction, all of those things. And it was really interesting how all those relationships were unique in some ways, but there were similarities across them in a lot of the themes that came up in the chat there, where, for instance, finding instructors at competitive rates, was a complication, and plugging skills gaps. The industry was willing to work with them, but it was still, tricky to navigate around some of the restrictions that were in place around their freedom of movement.
Thanks, Jen. I've got to just take one or more two more questions because we've got Andy Burnham waiting, and I'm conscious of his time. So, Emma, are you focused just on apprenticeships or FE, or are your services available to university students as well?
Yeah, great question. So we are open to universities as well. Lots of universities do get involved in our programmes, and some university students have gone on through our international competitions to win medals at the Skills Olympics. So yeah, anybody who's a university who'd like to get involved can drop me a line.
Great, thanks, Emma. And then anonymous user, there has been lots of talk about the role of FE in skills provision in relation to social mobility, but there seems to be a focus on FE from a vocational college perspective. I work in a sixth form college in an area of high deprivation, and a lot of strategies aimed at skills provision within education are focused on students studying vocational courses rather than A levels. Better advice and support for teachers and carers, careers professionals working in the sixth form would be useful. Just a quick comment. Question to Matt, geography matters, but is this selective? What about mayoral CAs and places like Staffordshire, Stoke-on-Trent? Matt.
Well, I mean, it's an issue, isn't it? Because the problem is, I mean, I'm actually based in Stoke-on-Trent, and the thing is, we cannot offer the same level of skilled support that we can within the West Midlands Combined Authority. And it's a problem, whereas before, when we had the National Union Learning Fund, that was possible. I mean, what we do want from a TUC perspective is, should there ever be a change in government, or even, you know, with the government we have, is to reintroduce a National Union Learning Fund. But it was quite acute recently when Wilco's went bust. And we found we could offer a much higher level of redundancy support to our members within the West Midlands Combined Authority region than we could to those out in the shires. And yet, the people in the shires, they're still facing the same challenges. They're still facing the same skill shortage. So, yeah, I hope that answers the question, but it is a problem.
Thanks. Claire.
Sorry, could I just, because there's one thing I did want to put into the mix, and I know it's slightly cheeky to just throw it in last minute, but one of the biggest things when we're talking about social mobility, and to really focus down on that, I think the culture in employers in terms of asking for degrees, speaking as a proud non-graduate from a working class background, I feel very strongly about this, that the amount of jobs that actually are ridiculously asking for qualifications that aren't needed. When they are needed, fine, but when they're not. Work experience, internships, mentors, these are the real practical things on the ground that get people who are from less advantaged backgrounds into more advantaged positions. And they are the things that, from those of us now, me proudly middle class, not working class, those are the things my children benefited from that others don't. And I think they are absolutely critical in the system to giving people a leg up.
Thank you so much, you did. I'm going to call it there because I'm really conscious of time. Thank you so much to Jen, Emma, Matt, Claire and Charlotte. We do have a couple of questions left. So if you're loitering around at the end of this block, we'll come back to those questions. That'd be great if you can for a few minutes, but we must move on to Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester, if we can, please. So thanks very much to all the panelists in that particular section. Let's just leave Andy on screen. It's his floor. A very good morning to you, Andy. Great to see you. Thank you so much for taking time out. I'm sorry to keep you waiting there, but as you can see, quite a number of questions coming in.
No,
Andy,
good to see
you,
Jonathan. Good morning, everybody. A really good discussion just now, and hopefully what I have got to say will build on that. Where I'm going to start, Jonathan, is with a discussion I had last night, a roundtable discussion at the Four Nations College Alliance, which we're hosting in Greater Manchester right now at the Manchester College. And it was a really interesting discussion. We had colleagues from the Netherlands and Sweden there. And we were just talking about what are the essential ingredients of a successful technical education system. And both the Netherlands and Sweden said the same thing, that firstly, it needs to be done at a regional level because of the way labour markets are different and have different needs. Therefore, you have to have that kind of regional articulation of the needs of the labour market. And secondly, it needs to be a system, an integrated system that can receive a request from industry or from employers, that can then be turned into something that meets the needs of the labour market. So employers, not just business, employers more broadly need to be able to, have a simple dialogue with a system that then can turn in their requests into what they need. And I think we're some way from that in this country. And I think there are a number of reasons, in my view, why we've never got this right. And the truth is we haven't got it right, and it goes back a long time. I think all the way back to a Royal Commission in the 19th century. We've not, as a country, come up with a compelling approach to technical education. And I think in recent times, under all parties in government, I think we've had the wrong hallmarks, really. We've not had devolved structures, number one. So we've not had that ability okay, we've had local authorities, but obviously functional, apologies for the dog, functional economies exist above the local authority level. So we've not had structures, particularly in England, that have been able to articulate clearly those needs of the local labour market. Secondly, we've had an approach to education, not just post-16 or indeed, adult education, but more broadly, which has been quite institutional in its focus. We've kind of broken things down, we've fragmented things. And that, I think, has left us with particularly in the technical space, quite a confusing landscape. And then when you add into that what Claire was saying before, the sort of, initiative-itis of successive ministers about boot camps and this and that and the other, it creates a really confusing picture for people. And it's hard to make sense of it all. So that's a second problem that we've had in our system. Then the third, you could argue, is the biggest, which is a sort of a mentality, really, a culture within English education that has reflected an obsession with the university route and has always seen this as a distinctly second-class option. And therefore, in Westminster, the attention has never gone into fixing this. It's always been a sort of a fringe concern. And I'm talking about my 16 years in Westminster, and I will hold my hands up for not doing enough, alongside other colleagues. But this has been a problem of all governments. The kind of 50% target for university set by the government I was in really enforced that sort of thinking, and didn't have a corresponding message for the other 50%. But I would also argue, under the coalition, the English baccalaureate has really cemented that mentality within the system, where schools are judged on the GCSEs that prepare young people for university. And again, what's the message to the kids who are not on the university route? So these are the ingredients, I would say. You've got to identify, you've got to be clear in your analysis of why we've got a problem in this space before you can fix it. And I'm trying in Greater Manchester to fix those fundamentals based on the local skills improvement plan that was carried out by the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, an excellent piece of work that they did. They've given us clearly what employers want, but we've now got to turn it into a plan that delivers. And we have a plan for an all-age, employer-driven, integrated technical education system. That is what we are trying to create. And within that, we are, particularly with a focus on our young people, looking at something we're calling the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate. And I'll say something more about that in a second. But this opportunity to do this is building on the Trailblazer devolution deal that we signed with the government in March last year. We made the case for more ability to shape post-16 technical education, and to be fair to Michael Gove, who negotiated that with us, he did a good job for us in the Whitehall system to give us this possibility. So we are determined to make the most of it. In my view, just before I get into the precise solution, just to say two things as to why this is, I think, of fundamental importance, and why, if I am re-elected as Mayor of Greater Manchester in May this year, it will become my top personal priority to see this system come into being. Well, firstly, if you think about our economy, if anyone's been to Manchester recently, you will see quite a dynamic economy visible through the skyline of the city, changing quickly, changing probably every time you come. That's a sign that things are changing quickly in Greater Manchester. We have been Europe's fastest growing digital and tech hub in the last 5 years. So you can imagine the skills requirements that places on our colleges and our technical education system and our training providers. We've got to be able to move fast if we're going to service the needs of this pretty dynamic economy. And the question is, are we there? You know, when investors, potential investors, talk to me, they say, well, the thing they want to talk about, number 1, 2, and 3, is people and skills, and they want pretty compelling answers as to, you know, how we can be sure that we can meet their needs. And I don't think as a country, I don't think we've got good enough answers to those potential investors at the moment, and we need to get better answers. So I think it's critical for the regional economy. And the ability of regional economies to bring in new investment. We need to give more compelling, clear answers on how we can ensure that we will have the trained workforce that they are going to need in a fast-changing world. But more broadly, and I would say more importantly, it's about what kind of society we are. You know, if you have this obsession with the university route and you don't correct it, doesn't that just build and breed this inequality that we see in all parts of England, where at 14, young people pick up the message that they are somehow a second-class student because they're not taking the English baccalaureate. They kind of look for what's there for them, and the message isn't clear, and that has so many damaging consequences. I've been a strong supporter of something we do here, which is a survey of our year 10s called the Be Well survey. And I don't know if any of my colleagues from Greater Manchester are on the call, but I'm sure they could put up a link to it if they are. This is a survey of year 10s, and it asks them a whole range of questions about their thoughts and their feelings. One being, do you have hope for the future? And it's quite a tough question to ask, 14-year-olds whether or not they have that sense of hope. 4 out of 5 positively say they do, but 1 in 5 say they don't. And I would say that's probably 2 in 5 in some of our less affluent communities. And that's a real issue, isn't it? It's a real issue then for kind of the path that they're on and what that means in terms of, the harmful behaviours maybe that leads them towards, or the kind of lack of opportunity then leads them in a bad direction. We've got to correct this. Really, we can't carry on not doing something. So here to my solution, and then I'll finish on this, Jonathan, and open up for any thoughts that people have. Let's start at 14. It is an all-age system, but I think you've got to start with young people and where they are. So I am starting there, and what I would like to see at 14 in Greater Manchester is 2 clear, equal routes for all young people. One, the well-established and well-understood university route that works extremely well for those who are on it, and I support it as well as our universities, because they really, it does deliver for people. So it's English baccalaureate, it's A-levels, it's UCAS, it's university. We all know it, and it works. Well, we're trying to create a parallel route that starts at 14 with the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, and these would be the GCSEs that employers in our city region most value. For instance, I'm almost certain, it's not going to be driven by politicians, by the way, but when we get that intelligence from our employers, I believe that engineering GCSE would be in that mix. Business studies GCSE, drama, art and design, music GCSE. We're a creative city. It's just wrong that the creative subjects are being squeezed out of the school, the secondary school curriculum. The whole host of others that you could mention too, other qualifications as well. So, firstly, we want to give our young people clear advice about the qualifications that your employers value, that then kind of point them towards further qualifications at 16 that take them towards good jobs. So what we're doing at 16 then is identifying 7 gateways into the Greater Manchester economy, which are our strongest areas. And then within that, working with our colleges who are working together as a group with us on this, and that's excellent because they've come together and are, becoming a system, if you like, because of the way they're working. We're looking at, within those key gateways like digital and tech or green construction, what are the T levels or other qualifications that then we can build up with employer input to turn into the sort of the right stepping stone towards good jobs in our economy. We think T levels. I absolutely need to stress, though, we see a continuing role for BTECs, and this is not about sort of a world without them, because they will be important for some young people who will need that extra support before perhaps moving to a T level. But we think T levels with the employer placement are actually a really valuable vehicle. An early experience from our colleges is that really binds young people in. It binds their parents in. They can feel it's taking them somewhere. And actually, from one of our colleges, Hopwood Hall in Rochdale, they report that 51% of students who've taken T levels have gone on to work for the employer that provided the work placement. And I think there's something really, really powerful in that. So that's the way we see it working. And then, of course, it would progress to higher qualifications, degree apprenticeships, perhaps level 6 qualifications. All the while, it will be overseen by an employer integration board. So employers will be shaping the content of these 7 gateways. They will be asked to provide the work placements to support the T levels and the other qualifications. They will help improve the quality of careers advice in our schools. We have a single portal called GMAX, Greater Manchester Apprenticeships and Career Service, and that in the end will become our UCAS. Giving young people one place to look for all of these opportunities, one place to apply, which absolutely is where I see this going. I want, when we roll this out through the academic years, starting in this September, as we, it's not possible to do this overnight, of course, but I'm looking at by 2030 we have that all-age, employer-driven, citywide, integrated technical education system. At that point, I would want young people to be able to apply at 14 or 15 for those T levels and the work placements connected with them through GMAX. And it's why I've gone to great lengths to sign up some of the big names in the city region behind this plan, the likes of the BBC, Siemens, the Bank of New York, big employers, big names who've come to our city region in recent times, who are now going to add the prestige to this route that the Russell Group adds to the university route, and that's how you get that parity of esteem between the academic and the technical. And truthfully, Jonathan, final point, I say equal routes. Well, I reckon there are a lot of young people in our city region who would see this as a superior route. If you can end up at the same destination with a level 6 or higher qualification, but without the debt, then I think that actually, for many young people in Greater Manchester, is superior. 2/3 of our kids don't go on the university route. Only 36% currently take the English baccalaureate. So we've got to give a better message to those 64% who are not on that pathway. Currently, they can see the skyscrapers from their bedroom window, but they can't see a path to those skyscrapers. Well, I want to give them one, and that's what this is all about. So thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll hand back to you.
Andy Burnham, thank you so much indeed. Thank you for setting out what is a really comprehensive plan as well, and thank you for your insights. And you've got some real challenges in and around Manchester, so I think you've really thought about how that all connects together. Much like our friends from Cambridge and Peterborough as well, and making sure that it delivers in a way that's appropriate, right skills, right place. And like you, Andy, I am very much a believer that apprenticeships and vocational training is a first choice every time choice, never a second choice, bad choice. And I too believe that people that go through a high quality experience come out the other side in a much more advantageous position compared to those that go to university, end up with a bag of debt and no job for a while afterwards. So it's about better utilization of those skills as well. We've got a number of questions, Andy, so I'm just going to whiz through a couple if I can.
Sure.
And we might ask our colleagues from the last panel to come back on as well, because we want to just mop up any other questions that we haven't picked up. So if you're okay with that. Is there a plan or ambition to link LSIPs that have been aligned to priorities to work together on a combined strategy that would benefit those multi-sited employers and sectors that have national skills issues? And I guess, Andy, in Manchester, you've got a load of big companies that have sites all over the UK. How are you connecting all that into the big picture of Manchester?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And, we see what we're trying to create here as a template that can go round the whole country, not just the mayoral combined authorities, although they would probably be more likely to try it first. So I call it the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate. You know, the advice at 14 leading to those gateways at 16. That's the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate, those pathways that lead young people through. To be honest, I think it would be, the content of it would be 90% the same if you were, you know, we call it the MBAC. If you were thinking of a BBAC in Birmingham, the vast majority of it would be the same. You'd just have a sort of a flavour, wouldn't you, that kind of links to the West Midlands regional economy. It would be an automotive flavour there. Or if you had an LBAC in Liverpool, you would have a marine and ports added flavour there. But what I kind of see here is a template that kind of broadly is the same, and it's a system that employers can drive with consistency, if you like. You know, in most places, most people will want broadly the same thing, but you've just got that ability to add that extra bit of local emphasis into it. But if you look at it the other way, not from the employer angle, but from the young people's angle, you know, I had a bit of pushback when I first put out the idea of the MBAC, but I'm sticking with it, and I'll tell you why. The most important thing to me is making this relevant to our young people. That is the most important thing to me. Those kids I was describing, Jonathan, who respond to our Be Well survey at 14, I want to get through to them. They are the people I'm most interested in getting through to, and I want them to see this as a relevant path to them. That's about their world. Manchester is their world. It's where they want to be. It's where they want to succeed. And it's, you know, it's about saying to them, this path takes you there. This is about where you live and your opportunities within where you live. It doesn't mean you have to stay here. You can go beyond, but in the first instance, that's where they see themselves being. So it's why I'm sticking with the MBAC. I think it's a really important thing. It makes it relevant to the young people we're trying to reach.
Thank you, Andy. Really comprehensive there. It's really interesting, actually, because, you know, again, around the world, a lot of people ask me about, you know, when should we start working with young people and encourage them into vocational training? And I always think it's as early as possible, you know, before they get mobile phones and the rest of their life in their hands, you know, because it all kind of falls apart at that point. And I think the other thing is a bit of training for parents wouldn't go amiss, because, you know, they hear the phrase stay in education until you're 18. And of course, that's loads of options, but they only ever think of that as being university.
I think I take your point, but it's what the phone can give you access to, isn't it? So let's just think about what you said for a minute, Jonathan. That thing about GMAX, that's a really important thing if we get it right, because if that becomes their window on the modern Greater Manchester economy, if we can get everything that is out there on there. See, the thing is, and I think parents are guilty of this, and I, you know, include myself in this, and certainly schools are to a degree as well. We're guilty of not knowing what's out there. You know, because it's not the big employers of the past, people kind of can't see the economy now. It's so, you know, it's much more fragmented, isn't it? And it's hard to know the jobs that are out there. The truth of the matter is there are incredible jobs out there. Very different than when I came back to Greater Manchester from university in the early 90s. There wasn't much there, to be honest, but the city's changed a lot since then. But sometimes people are still stuck in the narrative of decline of the 80s and the 90s, and oh, it's all gone, and you know, there's nothing. Well, it hasn't actually. It's just that people can't see it in the same way. And I think the first thing you've got to do is give young people a window on the you know, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough economy. Again, incredible opportunities within that, or the London and South East economy. Doesn't matter. If you can't see it, you can't be it, can you? And you can't aspire to get to it. And at the moment, they can't see it. So I think you've got to first and foremost give people that clear window on the modern economy, and then you give them the path to those opportunities through the MBAC and the approach to T levels that I mentioned.
Brilliant, thank you, Andy. I'm going to bolt a couple of questions here together because they're kind of similar. But one says, what are your thoughts about higher technical qualifications and how do they fit alongside this? And then the other really is, how do you see the role for vocational quals rather than GCSEs as part of the Greater Manchester Baccalaureate at 14?
Yeah, so I think this is a path that takes you through those higher qualifications, as I was saying, all the way to level 6, level 7. Absolutely. And I think, it will depend on the sector, and it will depend on the employers, won't it, in terms of, how far you take that. But definitely it should be taking people towards degree apprenticeships if they feel to me to be something that really needs to be built out with our universities. So I would want these paths. As I say, it's an all age system, by the way. I know I'm talking a lot about young people, but the same principles should apply, I think, for people trying to get back into the labour market. Adults perhaps who feel they're in something of a dead end in the labour market and want to sort of pivot towards the kind of the growing bits of the labour market, and we should be using our adult education budget to enable them to do that. So absolutely, all the way through, to be honest, and the paths don't end at T levels and a job. They obviously need to keep developing beyond that. And we need to show the jobs that offer the most progression, don't we, to young people. Just one quick point on that. I think if you think about this as well, it actually offers industries different ways of fixing vacancies. So the health service, I'm talking to the health service in Greater Manchester, I think we need to plot new pathways for young people, perhaps through some of the ancillary professions that are non-degree, that then eventually might take you to nursing, or perhaps through social care, then ultimately to nursing. And the NHS, I think, needs to become better at those in-work training opportunities that allow that. Or take public transport, where we're integrating public transport in Greater Manchester at the moment. We're going down the London approach, if you like, taking control of buses, integrating them with trams. If you look at that sector, at the moment, everyone's just employing individually, and there's very little progression. So, bus companies are employing people to be bus drivers, but where do you go from there? Or, we employ tram drivers. Again, where do you go from there? If you start to integrate public transport, bus, tram and train, you can start to say to young people, look, sign up to become train up to be a bus driver, then you can progress to a tram driver, then you can progress to a train. We need to think about progression within industries, don't we, when you start to make those industries work differently, as a more integrated system as well. So I think sectors need to think about progression, I would say, to make this system really, really work. And back on the qualifications at 14, that's got to be employer driven, it seems to me. And if they are vocational qualifications, absolutely, so be it. What do employers value? And once we know that, then I think you build the MBAC from that. I think the problem with the EBAC was I was Shadow Education Secretary when it came in, and I did challenge it at the time. I think there's a number of problems I see with it, but the list feels arbitrary to me. I don't see the evidence that backs up that list that says languages are more important than music, for instance. I mean, I don't see it. Or engineering is out. Again, I don't see it. However, if it's here and if it's staying, the least you must do is create a parallel path alongside it, and that's what the MBAC is trying to do. But those, in the same way that the government website gov.uk says the EBAC is made up of GCSEs that universities most value, that's what it says. Well, the MBAC path has to say these are the qualifications, GCSEs and other vocational qualifications, that employers most value. And then you've got a logical sort of set of options for young people at 14.
Andy, thank you. And we have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed for your insight, all of our speakers, actually. It's been really good to have you here, Andy. So really appreciate that very much indeed. Thank you.
Cheers, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Andy. Just a quick thank you then to all of our speakers today. So Parminder Kohli, Jen Nellis, Emma Roberts, Matt Poynton, Claire Paul, Charlotte Harrobin and Andy Burnham, of course, from Greater Manchester there. Thank you all very much indeed, everybody, for joining this discussion today. We are slightly over time, so hence I'm having to call it quits there. Maybe what we try and do is get some of those questions that have been unanswered to be responded to, and then we'll add those to the briefing pack. So I've just given an extra job to the WEF team there. They're going to love me for that. Thank you all very much. I hope you've enjoyed the time this morning. We are starting a break now. I think it's for 10 minutes. So given that it's 11 o'clock, the WEF team, do you want to restart at 11:10?
11:10 would be fine.
Thank you very much indeed, everybody. So 10 minutes to refresh yourselves, and then you're back with a new chair at 11:10. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you very much indeed, Jonathan, and thank you so much to all of our speakers for contributions in that half of the morning. I'm very sorry that we haven't been able to get to all of the questions, just as Jonathan said, and I do apologise for that, because I know there was quite a lot of points in the Q&A, but if any of the speakers are still here, please do feel free to answer any of the questions in the Q&A box in written format. As the chair says, we'll now take a 10-minute break, and resume at 11:10. 11:10 resumption, but thank you to everyone so far.